One. Welcome everybody to my latest vlog. This time, of course, coming from Brooklyn. We are still in the days of COVID virus, coronavirus, all of us stuck in our homes. Hopefully later on this vlog will be coming also, from Istanbul, Tel Aviv. But we managed in the last few weeks to bring people from all over the world. Last week we had our Ladino special, bringing people from Istanbul to Lisbon to Seattle. And today we're very happy, and I'm very happy to have Baris Cayli here with us from Derby in the UK, who is going to speak with me about his book. Let me tell you, this book has been a real delight to read. But before that, let me introduce him. Dr. Baris Cayli Messina is the author of Violence and Militants. It was published just last year in September in 2019 by the academic press, McGill Queen's University Press. He is currently visiting professor at Lumsa University in Italy, and he's a senior research fellow at the University of Derby and a senior research affiliate in TSAS, Canadian Network for Research on Terrorism, Security, and Society. He has served as a visiting academic at the Department of Sociology in the University of Oxford and the School of Criminal Justice in Rutgers, and not far from New York City. He was a visiting professor at the University of Palermo in 2018 and 2019. Dr. Messina's research has a strong interdisciplinary background and revolves around diverse subjects in social science and humanities. So very good. Thanks so much for being with us. It's my pleasure to have you. Me and Baris actually met here on Twitter about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And a lot of times on Twitter, we don't know each other that well. And suddenly you see, wow, a book. And I never knew quite what he did. And later on, we're going to get into how you define yourself as an academic, because you really cover a huge area. So I had no idea that you were working also in the Ottoman period. And then I see your book, Violence and Militants, right here it is. From Ottoman rebellions to jihadist organizations. And I was fascinated by the breadth of the topic, and you bringing in, Christian militants from mid-19th century Ottoman Empire and comparing them with, Islamic groups, radical groups, militant groups today. Between, we'll talk about in a second, but Hamas, ISIS, different groups, and you put them in different categories. Yeah, exactly. So before we start, and I'll let you spend a few minutes talking about your book, and then I'll go ahead and ask you questions, is I would like just to read about a few sentences from this. And it's about 30 seconds will take. Okay. Baris writes, studying tragedy, oppression, and injustice in the past helps to clarify the behavior of militants in the present. The assignment of blame has always rationalized the use of violence, and the causes motivating militants resonate in both the Ottoman Balkans of the 19th century and contemporary jihadist organizations. The rise of militant jihadis in the era of modernization and the weak ties of faith have been described as some as spectacular and unforeseen. So with that introduction, please share with some of your main arguments, your thoughts on your book. And as have recently published a book, after the book is published, there's always new thoughts emerge. And then later we can talk about your new work you are doing, which is quite exciting also on what I see as a very different topic, but I imagine you see as a very close topic. Please.
Yeah. Thanks Lee for having me. First of all, it's a pleasure having this virtual book talk. First, I want to start with what are the main questions that I investigated in this book. And I'd like to also briefly talk about my methodology. And then I will briefly summarize my arguments in the book that I developed. As an author and researcher and academic, I wanted to understand in this book how militants actually basically they rationalize and then apply violence. How this process occurs in different time periods and in different geographies. This was my main concern and my main motivation to investigate and to write this book. And then I asked questions, can underscore some common factors about the human intentionality when violence occurs. In what extent political, social, or cultural factors actually shape the rationalization and application process of violence by the militants? And what kind of conclusions can we reach about the violence and itself in this comparison between militant rebels in the Ottoman Empire, 19th century, and the militant jihadists today, when violence was used by Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. And then I did, of course, this book mainly based on archival research in the Ottoman archives in Istanbul. I consulted a number of different archives. My main interest, the historical period, was the Tazminat era, as it was mainly called 1980s, late 1980s, and up to 1876 with the declaration of the first Ottoman constitution. So I looked
basically
at
the Tanzimat period up to the first Ottoman constitution. Okay, perfect.
Yes, it's better to say this.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at documents of Grand Vizier's office in the Ottoman archives, patent degrees, registers of Ahmadi office, imperial decrees on foreign affairs, Ottoman foreign ministry political section documents, Ahmadi office registers, documents of provincial inspections of Bosnia, and I looked at documents of Grand Vizier's office related to the legislative and supreme councils, and the communications between ministers and the local governors in those regions, in the Balkan cities and towns. And for this archival research actually built on for my work to analyze and explore the militant rebellions in the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century. And for the militant jihadists, I focused on 4 militant jihadist organizations. These are Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS in the book. So I compared actually Christian rebels who used violence against the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century in the Balkans, and compared them with how Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS used violence from Afghanistan to the Levant. So for the militant rebels, I looked at archival documents, and for the militant jihadists, I looked at documents published by these 4 militant organizations. I analyzed the videos disseminated by militant groups. I actually focused on concepts, locations, and to analyze their attacks, how they launch their campaigns, those jihadist militant organizations, how they recruit new members, how they support, how they give support to the ideologues within their own movements. I started, of course, this comparison. Because my main motive was, while looking at all these documents and making analyses, there were 2 concepts, violence and militants. And my original point of departure was Charles Taylor's, the well-known philosopher, who said once that we cannot understand ideas if we leave them in isolation from their practices. This is the reason I looked at first how militants rationalize violence and how they apply it. So there are 2 processes that I looked at in this book. And this sequence, that rationalization and application of violence, indicates different forms of violence are used for different motivations. And the main argument in the book is that I introduced two different violence forms. Cultural violence.
Cultural violence versus structural violence, which later I'll ask you more about this, but please share with us.
So if you go to this argument that I developed in the book actually, first of all, uses grounded theory, because it is what I aimed as an author is that how can I develop a meaning-making process in this book to understand how violence is actually rationalized by Milton and applied. So the book positions violence as a concept in the center of the discussion, the whole discussion. And the book clarifies that violent response of the militants is attained through through the rationalization of violence, but this rationalization immediately moved towards the application of violence. And if you go to cultural violence and structural violence concept, cultural violence, in my definition, is that the use of physical force when it is used by a dissenter, by a militant, and those militants perceive that their own cultural identity is under threat and they are subject to injustice because of their identity. And that cultural identity is very much related to political and religious motives. Whereas structural violence is a form of physical force driven by social structural concerns of those militants. And when they use structural violence, they would like to defy the power of the militant or their oppressors. So it's very much related to perceived injustice of those militant jihadists and militant rebels when they use structural violence. And there are also occasions when both cultural violence and structural violence actually interact with each other, and we bear to witness the most catastrophic events when both cultural and structural violence used together. Because these are the instigator intersections actually used not only by militants, but also by the states to suppress those militants. So they similar to actually embrace cultural and structural violence and the process to suppress those militants in both Ottoman Balkans and the enemies of these four jihadist organizations.
Yeah, but you clearly show in your book that the violence goes both ways here, and one feeds off the other. You could say absolutely.
Yeah, definitely, and actually, the Syrian civil war is a great example of how a cultural violence and structural violence actually intersected, and as a result of these two combinations, the catastrophic outcome is so much visible, and it is not implicit anymore because it is the conflictual situation is so great and huge and enormous. And it is the reason that we have too many victims, and it affects everyone's lives, including increasing the fragility of the state organization at the same time, while they fight against the militants.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the main argument in the book that I focus on it, when I looked at this comparison between militant rebels in the Ottoman Empire and militant jihadists in the Middle East, the main argument mainly says in the book that the rationalization of violence is independent of time and geographical location. Militant rebels in the Ottoman Empire rationalized violence, those Christian militants, very similarly to those militants of these four jihadist organizations. However, I state that the application of violence actually matters, and it is different. And it's really based on time, geographical location, and the militant group in question. This is the main argument.
And I think something that, because in a second I can ask about, of course you're using specific groups that were in the late Ottoman Empire and the post-Ottoman Empire around the fall of the Caliphate, and I would say the historical trauma that many of the region itself endured by the fall of the empire. So this is in itself an Ottoman work on the Ottoman world, but also on the post-Ottoman world for the most part, and the failure to or the very rough road of transition towards a post-Ottoman world. I'd like to ask you a question, and this is something that confused me a bit, and it comes out later clear. But where does nationalism come into this picture? Why focus on Hamas and not the PLO? I think once you read the book, it's clear. But the Palestinian Liberation Organization or the FLN, where violence is used, no doubt violence is used, but it is different from what you are dealing with. Could you perhaps elaborate on that a bit?
Yes, it's a very good and relevant question. Thanks, Lee. Actually, when we look at, as you said, there's a strong connection of the Ottoman and post-Ottoman world, because both ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and Hezbollah, they all, in their provocations, they all refer to the Ottoman Empire and its power, it is allure. However, how they interpreted the power of the Ottoman Empire, actually, it fits very well their own agenda, the agenda of each of those militant groups. And in a very ironic way, they interpret those power very different from the Ottoman dynasty itself. Because Ottoman Empire, different from how they interpreted, particularly in the last century, it was a very secular empire, even though Sharia was ruled as an implementing legal system for Muslim community. The empire itself was very, very secular in the last century. And we can see actually from the photos of the daughters of caliphs while they are playing piano and piano and then no headscarves. It's very Western type of style of life they were living. And when we looked at those jihadist organizations, it's completely diverse and different. It's the reason that how they interpret the Ottoman Empire, the meaning-making process.
I think that's a very key point here. Is that
create a world, And if I come to your point about nationalism, Christian militants, I argue in the book that Hamas and Hezbollah is clearly different from Al-Qaeda and ISIS because they have a very strong national ideals. And similar Christian militants in the Ottoman Empire, even though I looked at Greek militants, Bulgarian militants, Serbian, Montenegrin militants, Bosnian militants, there was also a strong nationalism and ethnic nationalism under the Christianity, and that Slavic nationalism was somehow combined.
Absolutely.
And it was difficult to distinguish nationalism from religious discourse. So it was a rebellion, and it was a rebellion attempting the power of the Ottoman world, which was mainly Muslim, and actually it was a good reason for the ideologues of Christian militants to progress their visions, because there was also Turkish Christian militants in the book that I looked at. So it shows that nationalism is somehow very relevant, but it is combined with religious discourse. The same for Hamas and Hezbollah. Nationalism plays a role, but it is not separated from the power of religion. It's the reason that when I looked at different categories, cultural and structural violence, what determine the cultural violence actually political and religious factors, or what determines structural violence is related to social structural concerns. This is the reason how I separated these two violent forms under political religious concerns and social structural concerns.
Very interesting. I think a major contribution to your book is also to place Islamic jihadist groups into context and saying that this is not, you can have, Christian militants also in the Ottoman period. This is not unique to Islam. Often when I teach in my modern Middle East class, I said, the modern Middle East will teach you that, all groups know how to kill very well. And I think that's something that comes out in your work so importantly. Can I ask you, how did you get to, first of all, do you define yourself as a historian, a sociologist? I mean, how would you define yourself? And then how did you get to this topic? I think it's fascinating how you got to this topic. I'm someone that worked in the Ottoman archives also, and 90% of the people in the Ottoman archives are working on purely Ottoman history. This branches out, brings us to the future, if we're the historians stuck in the archives, which are fascinating archives. Let me just put in that you can bury yourself in work there. You don't really need to go and look for things after that. So how did you get to this topic? I see that as you've studied all over the world. You started off at Bilkin. I was at Bilkin a few years before you were at Bilkin. I was teaching, you were a student. A little difference there. Bilkin, I know, has a very rigorous political science department, international relations, and history department. So I wasn't surprised to see you from there. But how did you get to this? How did you get to this topic?
This is a great question. It helps me to explain myself. it's hard for me to define myself in a certain discipline. I'm definitely in the social science and humanities, but my educational background actually and my view on life makes me an interdisciplinary scholar. So I am generally in the book. I think it's an excellent proof that how I am shifting from sociology to anthropology, from philosophy to politics, because it is very difficult to separate from these disciplines if we want to really understand the human behavior and the collective uh, public outcomes related to this human behavior. This is the reason that it's a very interdisciplinary book, this one. And if we come to your question, how this came to writing this book, how this idea came to me. Um, I was working in the archives, and then ISIS actually gained a strong foothold in Syria and Iraq a few years ago. Then I said, this actually is, there's relevance actually. If you look, we need to understand human behavior, we need to compare it. So uh, I started comparing by centralizing violence and militants. This happened in the past, but to understand the present, we need to revisit the past. And we need to compare in different time zones and geographies how human behavior actually navigates in a very difficult time zone and geography. This is the reason I went on this subject. Or it's not easy to do that because you need to have some interest in all these subjects somehow. But you need to go.
Absolutely.
Writing this book took me 7 years from the start publishing it. So it's a whole,
I can believe it.
It's a lot because I started this book 5 years and I waited for almost 2 years reviewing process and publication. So when I saw on Twitter, Slovak Zizek wrote in 2 months a book on coronavirus, I was shocked. It's impossible mission for me.
Yeah.
I wrote it in 7 years and 2 months writing a book. It's incredible. So mainly I'm an interdisciplinary scholar and it's a very, I spent too long time. I would like to, while we are finishing our conversation, I'd like to make a humble suggestion for future scholars, writers, particularly if they never publish, but they are interested in publishing their first book. I would like to say that please be bold, be courageous. There might be some people, some events, occasions that distract you, that discourage you. Please be resistant and write down whatever you believe in. It is very important, and writing is a very difficult task. And in this book, I paid very attention. I don't know if you last time you read, I didn't want to be didactic. I never called those militants terrorists. I never used terrorist word in my book because I didn't want to offend the intelligence of reader. I leave the reader, I try to explain the whole process, and I left this to the reader and to make their own judgments about those militants and the response of those states to those militants.
No, I think, first of all, I think what you're saying is so true for, so many people, especially in academia. Many people in academia, unfortunately, I think, get pressured sometimes by professors, other people in the field that, this can't happen. How do you bring the Ottoman archives and how do you justify being, in the Ottoman archives for so long if you're not producing a history book? So I think this idea, and this is part of my vlog and my book talks, is to get exactly what you said, is to hear from scholars and that huge transformation that I just passed from dissertation to book. So it's something I didn't ask if this was your dissertation. I imagine it was your dissertation. Am I correct, or it wasn't your dissertation?
So it was not my dissertation, because my dissertation, my PhD was on how the Italian anti-mafia movement actually fights the Italian mafia groups.
That's what I was going to ask you. So perfect. So this wasn't your dissertation, and I think that's so really good job at getting this out. Tell me about your work on mafia networks and how does that connect to this? I think it's fascinating. I imagine, you work in Italian, you're fluent, I imagine. I didn't ask, I usually don't ask questions. But, you're very much embedded in Italian historical or sociological studies now. Can you give us, before we end, a few words about your future work and what you plan, and how does the mafia networks connect to what connect to your books, Violence and Militants?
Yeah, actually, even though the subjects are very differently, the subject is in the center again, violence. Because when I started doing my research, again, my second book is based on 10-year ethnographic research. I started doing ethnographic works in Italy. So I visited different towns and cities in Italy to understand how people fight the mafia, the local mafia. What are their motivations? What are those factors? What are those challenges? My second book actually is based on this 10-year long ethnographic work. And I have started already writing my second book, and hopefully I would like to finish in 2 years' time. And in this book, I am focusing on, again, historical and sociological factors since the emergence of the mafia organizations, mainly in Sicily, in the mid-19th century, with the fall of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies and the foundation of the Kingdom of Italy, and the other developments in the social and economic area. And then I am looking at the first rebellions against the mafia, peasant movements, and I am looking at the modern reactions against the mafia and mafia violence. So in this ethnographic work, I would like to understand how people resist against the mafia, how they get organized. I share their views. I listen to them. I observe many of the social protests. I record them. I already finished 4 ethnographic notebooks. So I have a very huge data because it's a tiny research project. And I'm very excited about writing this book. Again, similar to violence and militants, violence is in the center. But in this project, I would like to understand how those people in Sicily fight against the mafia, what they understand from violence and different forms of violence, and how their movement, their resistance actually shape their own worlds and their lives.
Fascinating, fascinating. Before we leave, I just want to read a little part about what you wrote on structural violence. And once you, I have to say that there's a lot of theory in this book, and it reads quite smoothly, and it's beautifully written. I'll go ahead and read just about 2 minutes, maybe 2 minutes. Each place, whether the Balkans, the Middle East, or Central Asia, has its own social structure of institutions and networks, but they share parallel descents that stimulate the rationalization of structural violence. The rationalization of structural violence is a process, and like all processes, it can be terminated in this case when those social structural concerns that provoked it are eliminated. You go on and state, injustice, exploitation by the powerful, the uneven distribution of social resources, and abuses of political and legal authority in everyday life make it difficult to attain harmony and social integrity. Militants use these factious conditions to mobilize people in line with their own agendas. Disillusion and mystification combine with truth and suffering in such volatile environments. Ending, you say, this perplexing conflation makes it difficult to distinguish facts from perceptions in the approach used by militants. What is clear in hindsight is that injustice is the principal commonality. Scapegoating allows militants to blame their opponents for the challenges they have to bear with, although some of these challenges really are the fault of their opponents. Others may be fabricated for effective propaganda. So when I read this statement, it really resonates so well to so much what, historiography, how we think of history, how we write it, and how you also talk about imagining communities there. And I think the fabrication of history sometimes to use, vis-a-vis a community, and what you explained earlier of how some of these Islamic groups interpret, the Ottoman past, including Turkish Islamic groups, as it being very different than really what it was in the late 19th, early 20th century. So I think that sentence really brought that out. Baris, let me thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It was fun and joy. I hope people who listen to us actually enjoyed from our talk. And thanks for having me. It was delightful.
And you can get this on Amazon, Amazon.com, other places. It's reasonably priced. Not like all books. I won't talk about all the other books that are
it's a perfect copy.
Not talking about my own. Yeah. So yeah. So it's very good. So with that, thanks so much. And my next vlog will come up as usually once a week. My next one will probably most likely be based on another week in review. So thanks for joining us and have a great day. And of course, in these days of COVID virus, I said violence, which is a very violent pandemic. Let's stop there. Thanks for being with us. Have a great day.